Up until recently, Jorge Masvidal has been playing a negotiation game with the UFC over how much money he feels like he deserves to fight Kamaru Usman at UFC 251. He wanted way more money to fight Kamaru Usman. To be fair, Kamaru Usman wanted a lot more money as well, but Jorge Masvidal is not the champion, so he doesn't really call the shots. However, he is a big name. So he felt as though, with the risk that taking on Kamaru Usman presents, even though he says that Kamaru Usman is this easy fight, he is still acknowledging that there is a huge risk in fighting Kamaru Usman, because if he loses to Kamaru Usman, his stock will drastically drop. Because if you lose to Kamaru Usman, unless you're Colby Covington, you tend to lose in a pretty humiliating way. Okay, and I know Colby Covington got finished, but he had some success in that fight because of how good his wrestling was. Usman didn't want to shoot on him. If Usman lays and prays and just does what he did to Woodley against Masvidal, Masvidal's going to lose all of his hype, and he understands that, so he's trying to get paid what he is worth in the meantime before he gets that title shot. But recently, Gilbert Burns has snuck in right in there, taken the fight for however much money he's getting. I'm sure he doesn't even mind. I think Gilbert Burns would have taken that title shot against Kamaru Usman for free, because that's how much being a world champion and fighting for the world title means to Gilbert Burns compared to Jorge Masvidal. But Masvidal wanted more money, which leaves him in a tough situation, because now he's not getting a title shot, which may have been what he wanted in the first place, because a few weeks ago he was looking to fight Nate Diaz in a rematch. But what does Jorge Masvidal do next? Because he has a lot of options in that welterweight division right now. 3 options mainly, by the names of Nate Diaz in a rematch, which I feel as though would lose a lot of attention, because I think the first fight was as big as it was, but now that we're doing a rematch, we kind of saw what happened in the fight. Jorge Masvidal beat him up for 3 rounds. Is there a narrative that maybe Nate Diaz would have came back in the 4th and 5th? Yes, but I feel like now people have watched the fights, and there won't be a Rock there for a rematch. There won't be Dwayne Johnson, by the way, not just a random Rock, the Rock there for the rematch. There won't be a huge crowd in attendance, or will there? Who knows when they're looking to rebook it. I don't feel as though the rematch between him and Nate Diaz would be quite the same as the first fight in terms of hype, and I'm sure some people would agree with me as well, although I'm sure the rematch would do good numbers. But he has some other options in that welterweight division. 2 people by the name of Colby Covington and Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards is a great option for him because it's a good fight for him. They're both coming off wins, which means it makes sense in terms of UFC matchmaking. The UFC matchmakers in Sean Shelby and Nick Maynard like to do fighters who are both coming off losses or both coming off wins, unless they're a former champion, in which case they get thrown right back to the wolves. That's usually how the matchmaking system in the UFC has worked for years and years and years. I feel as though that's why Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards would make sense next. However, Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington, if there ever was a fight to break the UFC matchmaking rules, even though they're not really rules, they're just sort of guidelines, if there was ever a fight to make that would maybe step over those guidelines, it would be Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington. I've wanted to watch that fight for the longest time, but however, I understand that with the Colby Covington fight, first of all, let's go through every fight on the list. We've got the Nate Diaz rematch for Jorge Masvidal. We've got the Leon Edwards fight for Jorge Masvidal. They have history together. We've got the Colby Covington fight for Masvidal. They have even more history together, the most history together, some would say. Even still, the least risky opponent out of all of them is Nate Diaz. Jorge Masvidal knows that. That's why, as soon as Masvidal thought that the Usman shot was out the window and he wasn't going to get paid the money that he feels like warrants the risk he's about to put himself in against Kamaru Usman, he immediately looked to call out Nate Diaz for a rematch. Nate Diaz rematch with Jorge Masvidal is an easy matchup for Jorge Masvidal. Nate Diaz is an aging fighter. I know Jorge Masvidal might be older than him or around the same age, but I think it's fair to say that Nate Diaz is maybe looking worse and worse in terms of how good he actually looks in the cage every single time we see him go out there, and Jorge Masvidal recently has been in a bit of a streak. Like, he's looking really good again in his career. He had some ups and downs before, but recently he's looking really good. He seems to have flourished in his career, but Nate Diaz has taken a lot of damage, and he's only going to have taken more damage if he comes back for the rematch in the first fight that they had together. Like, it's just more damage that if Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal rematch, the only thing I will see in that rematch is that, alright, now Masvidal knows he can beat Diaz, and Diaz has taken more damage in the original fight with Jorge Masvidal. That's the only thing that's changed, other than the fact that maybe Nate Diaz has now had an even longer layoff. He's now a year older. Masvidal's going to beat him, in my opinion, again. I am not hyped up for a Masvidal versus Nate Diaz rematch. I want to call that one off of the list immediately. I don't like that matchup. I know exactly what it is. It's a money grab for Masvidal. He knows the rematch is there because there's controversy over the stoppage. Even though he beat up Nate Diaz for 3 rounds, he knows that that fight is there. But as far as I'm concerned, Nate Diaz is not a title elimination match. As a hardcore fan, I am not hyped whatsoever for Masvidal versus Nate Diaz 2. With Colby Covington, and let's go over Colby Covington here. I'm immediately dismissing Nate Diaz as a potential opponent. I don't want to see that happen next. Colby Covington is another opponent that Jorge Masvidal could take on. Colby Covington was champ, interim champ, but still somewhat of a champ. He defended it against Robbie Lawler, even though he never had it. You know, it's kind of like the Tony Ferguson situation, but obviously Ferguson is a little bit more respected. But Colby Covington had a belt. He lost it. He fought for the title against Usman, lost. He's coming off a loss. That's kind of... I'd be okay to make Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal still. There's a massive narrative that Colby was one of the best in the division. He was seen as the guy to beat this guy and to beat Usman. It was a razor close fight. He's probably still the guy in the division to beat Usman other than Gilbert Burns. Colby Covington, Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman in the welterweight division are in a league of their own at the moment. And I think Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington would be a real title elimination bout against a legit threat to the title in Colby Covington. And if Masvidal does beat Colby, he'd be a massive name and a real potential threat to Kamaru Usman. Because let's say Jorge Masvidal goes out there, stuffs a couple takedowns from Colby Covington and KOs him. All of a sudden, that Usman versus Masvidal fight is way more interesting, and I'm liking Masvidal's chances even more, which is the point of a title elimination bout. A title elimination bout should be a convincer. A convincing bout that tells me the winner of this stands a real good chance against a champion, and that's exactly what Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal is. However, I understand that Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington understand that if they do this fight when one of them has a belt, they're going to earn a shit ton of pay-per-view. And right now, neither of them have a belt. I know Masvidal has the BMF belt, but you know, BMF belt, you don't even fight on Fight Island, you want to renegotiate your money, you went from the guy who fights anyone to free to the guy who doesn't fight anyone unless they pay the right amount of money, but I'll fight this guy for less money. Weird guy, but even still, BMF title, it doesn't really mean anything. It was a show, he fought Nate Diaz, he got it put around his waist, it doesn't really mean anything in terms of pay-per-view revenue. I don't feel like anyway, and plus Jorge Masvidal said he'd never put it on the line against a wrestler anyway, and a crotch sniffer, in his opinion. He'd never put it on the line against those guys, so he's not going to get any pay-per-view revenue. Even still, both Covington and Masvidal understand that if one of them has the belt, and they both think it's going to be them when they eventually square off, they're going to make a lot of money, which kind of, to me, puts the Covington versus Masvidal fight off the table. There is one other name that Jorge Masvidal could fight next that I would love to see him fight, Leon Edwards. A real title elimination bout. I understand that Leon Edwards is not a big name in the sport. However, I will say this to you. I know Leon Edwards has about 50k Instagram followers, and that is not a lot whatsoever, and actually Arnold Allen at featherweight is catching up to him. However, if you type in Leon Edwards versus Jorge Masvidal backstage on YouTube, it has 4.5 million views. I don't care how many Instagram followers you have. If you can generate a clip that can be used as promo for a fight that 4.5 million people have seen on YouTube, you are a huge name. Fair enough, a lot of people, I think a lot more people know of Leon Edwards than actually follow him, because to follow someone is to be a fan of someone, and you have to actually care what they go through in their day-to-day life. You want to hear what they say on certain topics, you want to see how they train. It's a very different thing. Knowing of someone and following someone are two completely different things. Leon Edwards is known by the masses, I am sure. Everyone knows the name. He's the guy who got in a backstage fight with Jorge Masvidal. That piece of promo is the perfect piece of promo to work towards a title elimination bout. They have history together. Fighting backstage is the best promo ever. It really is. Every time there's a backstage altercation between fighters, it leads to one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time. John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. Conor McGregor getting in everyone's face backstage. On every single one of his events, there's always some kind of backstage scuffle with Conor McGregor and one other person on the UFC roster. Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards is the fight I want to see next. It's a great title elimination bout between two worthy contenders, two guys on win streaks right now that have history together. A great matchup for Jorge Masvidal, by the way. Probably Jorge Masvidal's best matchup other than Nate Diaz in terms of Usman, Gilbert Burns, Colby Covington. Probably one of Masvidal's best matchups out of all of them. Maybe not Gilbert Burns. I think Jorge actually matches up well with Gilbert Burns compared to Usman and Woodley do to Gilbert Burns, because Jorge's got that stand-up style, and I think it really takes a skilled striker to give Gilbert Burns a bit of trouble. And plus, Gilbert Burns' offensive grappling is not the best in the world. However, Leon Edwards versus Jorge Masvidal is the fight I want to see next. I don't want to see anything else. I don't give a fuck. I know the casuals do. And it hurts me to even call them casuals. I haven't called someone a casual in a while. But I know they love the Nate Diaz Jorge Masvidal rematch idea. But as far as I'm aware, Masvidal's number 3. Nate Diaz is number fucking 10. You've already beaten him, regardless if it was doctor stoppage or not. You've beaten him. There's no need for a rematch. At all. I understand it would do good numbers and probably bring a lot more eyes to the sport and sell more pay-per-views than Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards. Who knows? But I actually think Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards would compete with Jorge Masvidal Nate Diaz too. I think the hype would go down in the rematch, and the hype for Leon Edwards versus Masvidal, if that got announced right now at UFC 254, let's say, that would be a sick fight. Masvidal-Edwards, that way, if Edwards wins, he finally gets the recognition he deserves, and it's a title elimination bout for Edwards, which is something that he also deserves right now. Leon Edwards seems to have always been one fight away from a title shot in his career, even before he fought RDA. He beat RDA, he wanted that one more fight. It's been ages now since he fought RDA. He was going to get it against Woodley, that went out the window. For a long time, Leon Edwards has been one fight away from a title shot. What better one fight away from a title shot than Jorge Masvidal to big up both of their names? I think it would be a fresh matchup that would generate a lot of attention. Masvidal versus Edwards, 4.5 million views. Name another backstage situation that's got 4.5 million views on YouTube. Let me see John Jones versus Daniel Cormier scuffle. John Jones, Daniel Cormier fights press conference. What comes up? How many views? 8.9 million. Okay, never mind. The Jones Cormier one was pretty huge, but even still, Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards is going to be a huge fight. I would love to see it made next. I think it's a great fight to make. It's easy for Masvidal as well. I don't understand. Masvidal seems to have a problem signing to fight all of these guys, but in his own words, they're all weak soup and he's going to destroy all of them because they're all bums that he's going to completely obliterate. Go and obliterate them then, and earn some easy money if it's that easy for you. Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards needs to take place next. In my opinion, it makes the most sense out of anyone on the UFC roster at welterweight. Colby Covington should fight Tyron Woodley in the meantime. Maybe we can do the winner of Edwards versus Masvidal versus the winner of Usman versus Burns, and the winner of Colby Covington versus Tyron Woodley gets the next title shot after the winner of Masvidal versus Edwards takes their title shot as well. That seems like the most sense. Like and subscribe. And then for everyone else outside the top 5, sorry, gonna have to wait your turn. See you later. Thank you for watching. Click that button there. Goodbye. Yeah.